Welcome. This is Rachel Eade with Santa Rosa CityBus. I'm a transit planner with the City of Santa Rosa and the project manager for the Reimagining CityBus project. Thank you for being here today for the Reimagining CityBus service scenario overview presentation. I'm going to be giving an overview of the service scenarios and how we got to this point. There will be time for questions at the end, and I will give information in a minute how you can send questions to me. And I also want to just note, this is a really important time in our process. This is a critical juncture for getting feedback from our riders and from the public about what they like and don't like about the service scenarios we've developed. So I want to really encourage you to take some time, really understand what we've proposed, and make sure you let us know what you think. And again, in addition to what you're concerned about or don't like, please let us know what you do like. I think there's a lot that people do really appreciate about what we've tried to do in these scenarios, in addition to some things that might cause some concern. So please do reach out to us and let us know, and I will make sure to give information about how to do that. I also want to note that at the end of the webinar today, we will be posting this video online. So the same link you have today for watching the webinar live, you can use to come back to view it at any time. And I also encourage you to share that link with other people that you think might be interested. We recognize a lot of people can't make it out to meetings. It's really hard to get to workshops. People have a lot going on. So this is a way that we're providing the same information that people can watch anytime it's convenient for them, and then have the opportunity to send us comments about what they think. One last note before I switch over to PowerPoint. I'm going to be going over a lot of maps as part of the PowerPoint. And in YouTube, in case you're not aware, you can make the YouTube video window go full screen. There's a little icon in the bottom right-hand corner of the video window. If you hit that, it'll make the window go full screen, which make it a bit easier for viewing the maps. So give me 1 minute. I'm going to share PowerPoint with you. Just take me a second. Okay. Okay, so you should be seeing a PowerPoint presentation now. And what I'm going to cover in this portion of the webinar is a quick overview about how we got to where we are today, what's next in the Reimagining CityBus process, and then I'm going to walk through an overview of the scenarios we've developed on a route-by-route basis, just going right around the CityBus system and talking about some of the changes we've proposed. And then there will be an opportunity at the end for me to take questions from anyone who wants to send them in. During the live webinar, if you're watching the live webinar on November 18th, you can email your questions to jgibson@srcity.org. That email address is right there on the screen. Please do us a favor and put webinar in the subject line. That way Joy will be able to determine which messages she's receiving today are questions for this webinar. If you're watching this later, after the November 18th, you can send questions and comments directly to me at Rachel Eade. My email is rede@srcity.org. And in case you're not aware, a lot of information is available on the Reimagining CityBus website, and that is srcity.org/reimagining. You can go there to get a packet that includes copies of all the maps we've developed for the different scenarios, as well as frequently asked questions. And there's lots of other information about the project to complement what we're going to show you in the webinar today. So how did we get here? For people who've been involved in the process for a while, you know that we've been working on this since about January of this year. In the spring, we did a lot of outreach. We went out into the community in many different ways to hear from our riders and others in the community about what they like about the current CityBus system, what they don't like, what we should improve, and what direction they think we should take with the system, recognizing that the CityBus system doesn't necessarily meet the travel needs we have today in Santa Rosa and are anticipating in the future. So we did a large number of stakeholder meetings with groups including human services organizations, educational institutions, employers, and many others that have a stake in how this bus system works. We also did a survey. We got about 850 responses, people identifying their priorities for changes to the system, as well as letting us know how they feel about certain trade-offs. For example, would people be willing to walk a little farther to better service, which is one of the central trade-offs that we're working with in this process. We got a great deal of comments from the public. We did planning workshops. We were at every large community event during the spring, as well as at the Transit Mall in Coddingtown, talking with riders and other members of the community. And we also have extensively involved our bus operators and our customer service staff, who have a really great perspective on riders' needs and what's working and what isn't working for our riders today. So out of that process, if I had to pick a few themes, these would be the ones that came through loud and clear. That the priorities included more frequent service in our system. People wanted to see 15-minute service on the key corridors where a lot of people are trying to ride and get to key destinations. People were interested in faster and more direct service, particularly on the major arterials. They find that a lot of our routes result in very long trips to get from point A to point B. They wanted to see something that was more in a straight line and faster. We received a lot of comments about a desire for more service that runs in two directions as opposed to the big one-way loops that we have a lot of in the system today. Those loops have a benefit of providing a lot of coverage over different areas, but they cause riders to travel a long way out of their direction of travel in many cases. And so that can really increase people's travel time. So more service in both directions, both for that reason and just to make the system more understandable for people, was a common request. We heard a lot about extended evening service, say 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. That is something that we are looking at. We're not going to talk about it today, but we are working on a proposal for a concept for a limited night service that we would hopefully be able to fund with a grant or some other means, just to get something out there that people could begin to use in those later evening hours. We know it's a huge need in the system, and it's something that we'll be bringing forward to the public after the holidays. Extended weekend hours is also part of this process. Particularly, we hear from people about the need to expand the hours of operation on Sunday at a minimum to match the hours of operation on Saturday. We also received a lot of comments about wanting to have different types of routes for different parts of the city, recognizing that some areas of the city have really, really high levels of transit ridership and transit demand, but other areas have much lower levels. Right now, we're serving everyone with the same general approach. People really wanted us to see putting those frequent direct routes on the main corridors to really improve the convenience of our system, and then maybe having some more of the neighborhood-oriented, more circulating routes for the lower density areas. And then finally, coordination with other bus operators is always a comment we receive whenever we do outreach. And that's something that we will continue to work on, and as we get to the scheduling part of this project. And coordination with SMART is now a part of that. So as we develop these service scenarios, we also paid attention to how our bus system would integrate with the SMART trains when they begin to operate at the end of 2016. So before I get into the maps, one really important thing that we've emphasized throughout this process is that we are grappling with trade-offs here. In the short term, that would be scenarios A and B that I'm going to show you today. We don't have any more money than we do today. We just have our current budget. And so what we're doing is rearranging our current resources to make a better transit system. So that is going to involve some trade-offs. And one of them that you'll see on your screen right now is if we put more frequent service in some parts of the system, that means we're going to have to reduce service elsewhere in the system. There's just no other way to do it. If we want to have faster, more direct service on major arterials, we'll have perhaps less coverage on neighborhood streets because we'll be consolidating service more on those main streets. And related to that, if we have more service that operates in two directions as opposed to one-way loops, for some people that could mean longer walks to the bus stop because, you know, the benefit, as I said, of a one-way loop is it covers a lot of area. When you make that into a two-way route in a budget-limited situation as we have today, you're not going to cover as much area. So some people may have to walk farther. So that's an important trade-off. And similarly for extended evening service, if we create more evening service to 11 p.m., unless we have a new way to fund that, then that will mean less service during the day. And the same with extended weekend hours. Any new hours we put into our system on the weekend mean that we'll have to take those hours out of the weekdays. So we have been really wrestling on the transit staff with the trade-offs involved in this process, trying to find the sweet spot that improves the transit system, makes it more convenient for our riders, but still provides the coverage we need to cover the neighborhoods, to get people to the transit system. And we want your help to help us define where that sweet spot is. And we've taken our first try at it, and with your feedback, we'll continue to refine. So in addition to all the public feedback we got, we also did a great deal of analysis of a variety of data sets. And I'm not going to drag you through all of that right now. I just wanted to give a couple of examples. You know, on the left, you'll see a map that illustrates some of the main travel patterns in Santa Rosa. It highlights the SRJC area as a major hub for travel, as well as Coddingtown and downtown, and then some of the schools. And so we really looked at how well our system and where our riders are trying to go matches the travel patterns in Santa Rosa today. On the right, and I have my little laser pointer here, you'll see this map that is a map of our Route 14, today's Route 14. And what you see here is how we used our automated passenger counter data from our buses to map the number of boardings and alightings at every bus stop along this route. So you'll see these bubbles are bigger if there's more people getting on and off at that stop. Some of these little red dots you see are bus stops that are very lightly used. And Route 14 is a very popular route, so we have high ridership along the whole route. We do have some routes in the system where we have long segments with very low ridership. And those were the segments we looked at to remove service in order to improve service in the places where we had high levels of ridership. Again, that goes back to the trade-offs that are really at the part of this project. So this is one tool we used for the service planning, and we have these maps for every route in the system. And it was a really, really helpful piece to really understand where our riders are and where they're trying to go. Whoops. There we go. So our overall goal for this project is to make CityBus more useful and more convenient for the majority of our riders. And I say majority just because we recognize that anytime you change transit service, someone will be disadvantaged. We could create a system that benefits or improves service for 95% of our riders, but we know because of these trade-offs we're working with that some people will have a longer trip or a trip that now requires a transfer or a longer walk to get to their bus stop. So, so within that goal, trying to improve the system for the majority of the riders, how we proposed to get there, and you'll see this in the scenarios, is that we've worked to better match the level of transit service, including the frequency and the directness of the route, to the level of ridership in different parts of the city. We've increased the frequency to 15 minutes on our major corridors. We have a lot more two-way service in these scenarios, and that might not be obvious when you first look at the map. But if you really study it, you'll see that there are a number of routes that currently are one-way routes or that operate with big one-way loops as part of the route that now operate in both directions. They're now bidirectional. We think that's a big benefit to folks in terms of travel time and convenience, and then just the simplicity of understanding how to use our system. We've really worked to reduce duplication where we have multiple routes serving one corridor, which can be confusing, and it's also inefficient. It means that we're over serving one area to the detriment of other areas potentially. And then finally, we looked at every route and we made sure that every route has a strong anchor at each end, so that wherever you are on that route, at one end and at the other end, you have somewhere that's useful and important for you to get to, a key destination that you're linked to on that route. So we have a lot of considerations that went into this planning process. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just so folks understand, you know, there's a lot of constraints that shape how we draw these lines on the map. The first is budget limits. I think everybody understands that. We, in the short term, are only working with the number of vehicles and the operating funding that we have today. We also have to consider the efficient use of our vehicles and how routes are cycling. And by that, we mean that we have to make sure that when we're drawing lines on a map, we can actually serve that route inbound and outbound with the number of vehicles we want to serve it with to be able to provide service throughout the rest of the system. And an example I sometimes give is, you know, you can draw a route that takes half an hour for a bus to complete. And if you want that route to have a 30-minute frequency, then you only need one bus to run it. But if you add a 5 or 10-minute deviation to that route, then you need 2 buses to run that route every half an hour. And that then ties up part of a second vehicle and leads to a really inefficient situation in some cases where a bus is kind of sitting around waiting to do its next trip. So we had to pay attention to that. We also make sure that we have adequate recovery time so that at the end of a route, there's a little bit extra time. So if there's a delay along the route, a detour, an issue with a big load of people getting on that slows down the trip, that the buses can stay on time for their next trip. And then we also have to consider the street network. Where can buses make turns? What are the intersection controls that allow buses to move through intersections, such as a stoplight or a stop sign, so they don't get hung up in traffic? And we also had a lot of input from our bus operators, our customer service staff, and field supervisors. We really want to understand the operational perspective. How will this bus route really work on the street, and will it work? And then finally, we do field checks. So we have been out in the system looking at different route segments and thinking about, well, if we remove this segment, would people still be able to walk to the nearest bus route? Is the pedestrian network of a quality that would enable people to safely get to the next bus route? So those are all parts of what we do in transit service planning. So I'm almost to the maps, but before I get there, I just wanted to let you know what happens next in the process. So your feedback on these scenarios will be used to develop one short-range service scenario that we could implement next year, as well as one long-range scenario that's more of a vision scenario that we can work towards. And as you see here on the slide, both of those scenarios are likely to combine different elements of all three scenarios and probably some new ideas too. So we're not necessarily choosing scenario A or scenario B. We really want to know what people like and don't like about the different scenarios and what the issues are or the opportunities so that we can continue to make changes. Once we've come up with a short-term scenario and a long-range scenario that we think makes sense and reflects the community feedback, we'll take that to the City Council in early 2016 for a study session, and the council will have a chance to hear from the public. They'll have a chance to hear how we responded to the public feedback and let us know if they think we're on the right track. As soon as we feel like we're on the right track, we'll move forward into a draft plan and one more round of public outreach before we adopt the plan, hopefully in the early spring. That will give us time to hopefully prepare to implement the new system for August 2016. Our goal is that we would have the new CityBus system in place before school starts in August of 2016. So a few notes for understanding the maps that I'm about to show you and that are also available on our website. For the purposes of this part of the process, we're really focusing on weekday daytime service, meaning service that occurs within our current span of service, roughly from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. After we feel like we have the right lines on the map for the weekdays, we'll scale that to Saturday and Sunday, and we'll continue to develop our concept around night service. So right now, our focus is let's get the right lines, the right frequencies for the regular weekday service, and then we'll move on from there. On the maps, you'll see that we've indicated the frequency of each route by shading underneath the route. So if you see a thick black shading underneath a route, that indicates that we're proposing that route operate every 15 minutes, so with a 15-minute frequency. If you see kind of a medium width, dark gray line underneath it, that indicates the route would operate every 30 minutes. And that's most of the routes. We have a few 15-minute routes, a good number of 30-minute routes, and then a few 60-minute routes, which are the thinnest line. So that gives you a sense just looking at the maps of what we're proposing for frequency throughout the system. And that's definitely subject to public comment as well. So feel free to comment on those assumptions. And then also we've indicated one-way service with arrows. So if you see a route and you don't see any arrows on it, that means it runs in both directions. If you see these routes showing the direction, that indicates that there's a one-way loop as part of that route. It's important to note that the routes are numbered in these scenarios, but those numbers may or may not correspond to the routes in our system today. You'll also notice that there are some route numbers we have today that aren't on these maps, and some people could look at that and say, oh, I don't see Route 17, you've eliminated Route 17. In most cases, we have not eliminated a specific route. Actually, we haven't in any case. What we've done is merged routes together, combine different route segments with different routes in a way that we think serves the riders better. We might be wrong about that. You can let us know. But we haven't wholesale eliminated routes, although we have eliminated some segments of routes. And so we want people to really pay attention to that. We've eliminated segments of routes where we see an opportunity to serve an area in a new way that we think is better. And also because those segments have lower ridership and sometimes very low ridership. We recognize that there are still needs and there are still some people even in low ridership areas that really need access to service. But what we're asking people to let us know is, we're wondering if, can you walk farther to that next closest route because we think it's going to be better service for you? Is that a trade-off that you're willing to accept? So please weigh in on that. So before I get into the big scenario maps, I just wanted to give an example that it's been effective to share with people at the beginning of these presentations. And that's to give you a sense of the overall approach we've taken by focusing on Mendocino Avenue, which is our strongest corridor by far. I think that doesn't surprise any of our riders. It also has really strong growth potential for transit ridership, but we're not serving it that way today. On the left here, you'll see our current service for Mendocino Avenue. We have 4 different routes serving different parts of Mendocino Avenue, but the schedules aren't particularly coordinated, so you don't get a high frequency necessarily. A lot of times the buses are coming back down Mendocino nose to tail. We don't have any northbound service that stays on Mendocino north of Steel Lane in our current system, although you can get up to Kaiser through county administration on Route 14. And so we're not serving that corridor in a direct and frequent way that we really should be, considering the amount of ridership and the amount of people who want to get up and down that corridor to different destinations. So on the right, you'll see what we've proposed in these scenarios for Mendocino Avenue, and that is a new Route 1. We would pull all the routes off Mendocino Avenue except for Route 1 and this little portion of the Route 7, which I'll talk about later. But this route would start at the Transit Mall, travel up Mendocino Avenue, all the way to Bicentennial, so all the way up to Kaiser. It would cross the highway at Bicentennial, and it would come back down range to Cottingtown, to the Northside Transit Center. And it would do that and then it would go back the way it came. And it would do that every 15 minutes in both directions all day long. So that creates a very fast, direct, frequent route on our strongest corridor, and it connects our 2 strongest transit hubs, as well as connecting 2 sides of Santa Rosa where we have very strong transit ridership. For people in the Cottingtown area, it provides a much better connection to Kaiser. Right now, they're very close to Kaiser, but it's very hard to get there on the bus. And it solves a number of other problems for access for a lot of our riders. I will talk in a minute about the piece of the current Route 1 that's not shown here, but I just wanted to focus on the Mendocino corridor for the moment to give an example of the approach we've taken. You'll see a lot fewer lines on the map on the right. We've really consolidated service, simplified the system, reduced the overlapping of routes, especially down here near downtown. We have a lot of routes overlapping, and it's not a particularly efficient use of service. And we still have a lot of routes close together here, in this much more simple system that we provide, that we think is much more direct and will be faster for people to get around. Another example is Santa Rosa Avenue, another strong corridor for us. And right now, as our riders know, we have 3 different routes that serve Santa Rosa Avenue. That's the left-hand map. And they're a bit tangled up in each other. It's very confusing to understand which route does what. And there's a lot of turns. It can take a long time to get up and down Santa Rosa Avenue. And that's even true of our Route 19, because right now Route 19 comes down Santa Rosa Avenue and crosses over the highway over to the Southside Transfer Center at Southwest Community Park on Hearn before coming back to Santa Rosa Avenue and going down to the town center. So that can create a lot of out of direction travel for our riders. And in the spring, many of our riders said, can you just create one route that goes straight up and down Santa Rosa Avenue? So on the right, that's what we've done. We're showing the Route 19 going straight up, straight down and straight back up Santa Rosa Avenue every half an hour. And we did a similar thing with the Route 5. We pulled it over to Santa Rosa Avenue and Petaluma Hill Road, goes straight up and down, turns around at Target, and comes back. And then what we've proposed is we would stagger the schedules of the 19 and the 5. So there would be 15-minute service between downtown and the Santa Rosa Marketplace where Target and Costco are, and 15-minute service in the other direction as well. You'll see what we've sacrificed to do that is some of the neighborhood coverage. So for example, we'll be asking people on Henley and Aston to walk the distance out to Petaluma Hill Road. And we think it's a doable thing for most people. It's about a quarter mile at most. For many people, it's much less than that. It's about a 5-minute walk or less. And there's good pedestrian infrastructure throughout. I'll talk about this blue dot in a little bit later in the presentation, but you're seeing that the 18 is pulled out of some of the neighborhood streets here, and I'll explain the thinking behind that when I get to Route 18. But as we go through this, you will see there are these blue dots that indicate places that we have some concern about removing a bus based on the quality of the pedestrian environment or other factors. But I'll talk about that as I go through the system. So now I'm going to go through the maps in a very systematic way, clockwise around the system, and talk about the changes that we've proposed in the different scenarios. And then we'll be ready to take questions if anyone has sent them in. And I would encourage you, if you do have questions, don't wait till the end to email them to jgipson@srcity.org, and that's JGIPSON at srcity.org. That way Joy can have them ready when I get to the questions and we can start going through them. So we already talked about Mendocino Avenue. You'll see I've highlighted this in the presentation in blue, and this is the proposal for the new Route 1. I do want to note that we're not showing fixed route service on the former loop on Route 1 on Chanate, Parker Hill Road, and Fountain Grove, but you will see that that area does have one of these blue dots. And that's indicating that we understand that that area deserves some special consideration, because while we have low ridership on Chanate and Parker Hill Road and Fountain Grove, we have regular steady riders. We aren't sure what's going to happen in the future with the old Sutter Hospital site. There may be housing developed there. There are still some county offices on Chanate that people need to get to. So we do recognize that there may be some kind of service that we need to have in this area, key site, other locations. And we're working on what that should look like. And so we definitely want feedback. If you're a rider on that loop of the current Route 1 that's not being covered on this map, definitely get in touch and let us know how you're using the system and where you're trying to go. And that will help us assess how we might be able to meet needs perhaps with a different kind of service than we operate today. So continuing around the system, this is a new route that we've proposed. We're calling it the Route 7, but it's very different than the current Route 7. It's an east-west route that does not go through downtown, and there's two versions of it. The first would start in Montgomery Village, go down Montgomery, over to College, up Mendocino, and across Steel Lane to Cottingtown, and then it would continue down to the West Side Transfer Center, and then it would turn around and come back just the way it came out. And in this scenario, it would do that every hour. And then there's another version of that in scenario B that comes out of Montgomery Village over Pacific and Bryden, like the Route 4 does today, up Mendocino to Steel, and then it would stop at Cottingtown Mall and turn around. And so the reason for this new route is we know that a lot of people from the east side of town are trying to get to the JC as well as Cottingtown, and we wanted to propose a way for them to do that without having to make a transfer. So the Rincon Valley service is something we really want feedback about from riders. We looked at a lot of different possible solutions for some of the issues with the routes 4 and 7. This is what we're proposing. Love to get feedback. Right now, as our riders know, Route 4 and Route 7 serve Rincon Valley, but between the Transit Mall and Mission and Highway 12, the 4 and the 7 are doing two different things. In some cases, one route is doing one thing in one direction and a different thing in a different direction. It can be very confusing for our riders. And then there's some areas that only have hourly service because of that. So what we've proposed is combining routes 4 and 7 into this proposed 4A, 4B that would travel the exact same route between downtown and Mission and Highway 12. The benefit of that is that we would get half-hour frequency along this whole stretch instead of having some portions with only hourly service. When these routes get to Rincon Valley, they would do what they do today. One route would go counterclockwise through Rincon Valley every hour, and the other route would go clockwise through Rincon Valley. That piece is the same as it is today. And we have two versions of that alignment. One that I just showed you, it comes out 4th Street to Montgomery Village, and in this version, Route 4A and 4B would come out Sonoma to Montgomery Village. and then up to Rincon Valley. Some of what we sacrificed for this is coverage on this section of Highway 12 between Farmers Lane and Mission. We do have some ridership there. It's not a lot, but we do know that there are some people out there who are somewhat regular riders. So we're evaluating this decision. We chose to go on Montgomery because there's more ridership there than on this piece of Highway 12, but we understand that we are asking those people to have to travel farther to get to their bus route. So going down to Bennett Valley, what we've proposed in Bennett Valley is combining Route 2 and Route 8 into one route. And the reason for this is that by doing that by merging those routes, we can get 30-minute frequency back into this part of Bennett Valley that for the last couple of years has only had hourly transit service. And that's been a real hardship for people. And we've heard a lot of complaints from our riders about having 60-minute service and really no other options in that area for transit service. So in this route, the route would come out just as the Route 8 does today on Sonoma. Instead of turning on Hohen, it would continue all the way down to Bethards into the Bennett Valley Safeway before coming back up Yulupa and returning downtown. And that would happen every half-hour frequency. Some of what we give up in this proposal is some coverage on Route 2, for example, down Hammond past the high school and across Hohen. The high school, we had some conversations with the high school as well as looked at our ridership data, and it appears that most of the students at the high school are coming and going from Montgomery Village for their bus trips as opposed to waiting in front of the high school, and Hammond is a really tricky street for buses. So that's why we proposed asking the students to have Montgomery Village be their high school bus stop. This section of Hohen, we definitely want to hear from people about issues there. It's relatively low ridership, but we do have some ridership there. How do people feel about walking out to Yulupa to get their trip into downtown or to other places they're trying to go? There's another version of this combined Route 2, Route 8 that would travel on 4th Street instead of on Sonoma. And that's just another alternative for people to evaluate. So moving down to Route 18, we had a couple of goals for Route 18. Route 18 was designed to connect a number of senior residences with shopping and to provide that service on one route. The down points of Route 18 are that it's very long and it's a one-way loop. So it's a one-way loop that takes a whole hour to complete. So if you live here at Vista Sonoma and in the current Route 18 and you get on the bus and go over to Safeway to go shopping, before you can go home, you have to go all the way back downtown and then all the way back down Santa Rosa Avenue and then back out to Vista Sonoma. And we'd like to make the route more useful for people. And so how we propose doing that is a couple of different options that both operate in 2 directions instead of just one direction. So in this option, the route comes out of the Transit Mall down East Street. It wouldn't deviate on Tupper and Brown as it does today. Those streets are so narrow for transit buses and it's very easy for us to get stuck on those streets. So the bus would come down to Maple, turn around by the Bennett Valley Senior Center, come out to Vista Sonoma just like it does today, but it would actually then continue out down Hohen to Yulupa, and then it would turn around at the Bennett Valley Safeway and come back the way it came out. So that's one version of Route 18 that would connect the senior residences to Bennett Valley Safeway. And another version would still connect them to Montgomery Village. So it's the same route in the previous scenario, but it would stop at Montgomery Village and then turn around and go back just the way it came. There could still be other options for Route 18. We want feedback from people who ride the 18 about where they want to go and what works and doesn't work about that route for them. You'll notice that we don't have the Route 18 serving Santa Rosa Avenue. That was a decision we made just based on the proximity to transfer out to Santa Rosa Avenue from the 18. And also the fact that we had to streamline some service to be able to get this to be a bidirectional route, meaning a route that operates in 2 directions. The blue dot that I mentioned earlier down here on Colgan is that's Vintage Park, which is senior housing, currently served by Route 18. The reason it has a blue dot is because we recognize the pedestrian connection either to Santa Rosa Avenue or to Petaluma Hill Road needs improvement. We need to do some infrastructure work before we can really ask people to walk out to either of those streets to catch the bus. So we already talked a bit about Route 5. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, just to highlight again that we've proposed really streamlining Route 5 to go straight up and down Petaluma Hill Road, turning around at Target, so be a very fast, direct route. And the same with Route 19, that we've proposed that it just go down and up Santa Rosa Avenue with no deviations. So I'm going to move over to Southwest Santa Rosa now. We're about halfway through the system, so hang in there. So we're going to talk about the Route 12. And the Route 12 we proposed isn't very different from the Route 12 today. It starts at the Transit Mall, comes out 3rd Street, down Olive, down Corby, across Hearn, goes out to Southwest Community Park, and then comes back up west. The one change that we proposed in scenario A is the bus would just continue straight up west instead of deviating on Delport and McMinn. That will provide a more direct, faster trip. A lot of riders have requested that we continue straight up west, but we want to hear from the people who appreciate that Delport McMinn deviation. The other version of Route 12 in scenario B would do the same thing, except instead of deviating to Southwest Park, it would just come straight up west. So it would just be a loop around Corby, Hearn, and west. It may be that at school bell times, we need to get that deviation in there to connect kids from the neighborhood over to Elsie Allen High School. We want to hear from people about that. The reason we've proposed this route without that deviation is simply that this version of the route only takes one bus to operate, whereas with the deviation to the park, we would need 2 buses to operate it. So it's strictly a concept we've put out there so that we can use that extra bus to do something else in another part of the system. So Route 9 on Sebastopol Road is one of our strongest routes, our highest ridership route. But again, it's an example of a corridor we don't necessarily serve like it is a high ridership corridor. So in scenario A, we're showing the Route 9 doing the exact same thing it does today. It comes out 3rd Street and Olive, out Sebastopol Road, deviates down onto North Point Parkway and Corporate Center Parkway, back to Sebastopol, and then does this loop out by Sam Jones Hall on Finley and South Wright Road past the JC campus and back downtown. So there's a couple of issues with this. Right now, if people want to go, for example, they're getting on at Becoming Independent or Amy's Kitchen or the other destinations down in Corporate Center Parkway area, to get back downtown, they have to travel all the way around the loop and back in. There's a lot of examples of that, people having to travel out of their direction and take extra time to get up and down Sebastopol Road. So what we've proposed in scenario B is breaking apart the Route 9 into 2 different routes. So one route would start downtown, come out Sebastopol Road, do the loop around North Point Parkway and Corporate Center Parkway, and then come straight back in. And that would happen every half-hour frequency. Then there'd be a second route that would come out Sebastopol Road all the way to Fresno, do the loop by Sam Jones Hall and SRJC Southwest Campus, and come straight back into downtown. So those routes would each operate every half an hour, and then their schedules would be staggered so that between downtown and Stony Point Road, we would have 15-minute service all day long, which really is needed in that area. It's very high ridership, and particularly in the afternoons, we have extremely full buses. So the other benefit of that would be people would have much more direct trips to their destinations. For Becoming Independent, Amy's Kitchen, the other employers, a new Kaiser building being contemplated on Corporate Center Parkway, people would have a quick trip out and back in. And then similarly for Sam Jones Hall, SRJC campus, and the neighborhood here, they would have a quick trip in and out without extra deviations. All right, so the last route serving Southwest Santa Rosa is the Route 15, and we've proposed some changes to the Route 15. Route 15 starts at Cottingtown, just as it does today, comes down Guerneville Road in Marlow and down Stony Point. But instead of deviating onto Corporate Center and North Point Parkway, it would just continue south to Hearn, do the loop around at Dutton Meadow and Bellevue, and then come right back up Stony Point Road to Cottingtown. Our sense is that a lot of people who are on the 15, this deviation is taking them out of their way for their ultimate destination. You can let us know if we're wrong about that. But we propose streamlining the route of it, make it a faster trip for people. There's another version of the Route 15 that comes out of Cottingtown in the same way, down Marlow and Stony Point to Hearn. And then instead of doing the loop around Dutton Meadow and Bellevue, it would continue across Hearn over to Target in the Santa Rosa Marketplace. It would cross the highway, go over to Santa Rosa Avenue, turn around, come back, and then return back to Coddingtown. So we've proposed this because we do recognize that there's a need to connect Southwest Santa Rosa with Santa Rosa Avenue. Right now we do that with Route 19, but we actually think this could be more effective, because instead of asking people in the neighborhood to get all the way down here to the Southside Transfer Center to connect to the 19, we would be able to operate through a greater portion of the neighborhood to be able to give people this access. This portion of the route covering Dutton Meadow and Bellevue, in this scenario, just because of the resource limitations, would only operate at school bell times to be able to take students to and from the front door of LC Allen High School. During the rest of the day, students can come through the park or through the neighborhood to get to the high school. We do have some concern about this because we do know that Dutton Meadow has more and more housing development. There's a lot in the process of being developed there. So we do recognize that there is a trade-off there involved with the coverage of this area and being able to provide access to other neighbors throughout the day. Okay, we're moving up to Northwest Santa Rosa. This is our last quadrant of the city, and I'm going to try to get through it quickly because time is ticking away. What we propose for the Route 3 is that we've shortened it a bit to really focus on the highest ridership area of the Route 3. So it would come out of downtown. It would actually come all the way to Dutton in this scenario instead of wiggling through Railroad Square. So come out to Dutton, do the loop around West 9th and College, and then come back down Dutton to 3rd and into downtown. So we would be losing this section of coverage on College, but it's not very transit oriented. We get very little ridership in this segment. What we would consider doing is having a special bus at bell times or a deviation of this route at school bell times to take the students from this neighborhood over to Santa Rosa Middle School. So that may be something that's needed, because right now we do carry a lot of students from this neighborhood over to the middle school. So this new Route 6 is a little controversial. We think it's a great idea, but it does have some down points. So I'm going to talk about those real quick. This route was created to try to provide two-way service in the areas served by Route 6 and Route 11 that right now only have really large one-way loops. So right now the Route 11 travels in a big loop down to Guerneville, up Fulton, up to Piner, and then back to Coddingtown. So folks up here who are trying to get to Piner High School, they have to come all the way over to Coddingtown and then back out and all the way around. We really see this as an area that deserves two-way transit service. Similarly with Route 6, we have a really big one-way loop on Route 6 on West 3rd, Fulton, and Stony Point. So what we've done is combined these two routes into one route that would start at Coddingtown, come out to Piner Road and Fulton, down Fulton to West 3rd, and then come into downtown. And then it would turn around and go back the way that it came. And it would do that every half an hour in each direction. So there'd be half-hour bidirectional service along that whole new route. So what we give up to get that route, again, because of the resource limitations, is some pretty significant areas of coverage along Guerneville Road and West College. So we have concern about that for sure, because we do know, we have a very, very small amount of ridership here on College, a bit more on Guerneville. A lot of it is pretty close, to, for example, to Fulton, where people could walk out and have access to this better service. But for folks on this side of those areas or in the middle that would be having to walk out in either direction, we do have some concern about whether that distance is too far to get to your transit service. So definitely want feedback on that. Overall, we've been hearing that people really like this route. They think it's a good idea, but there is some concern about the lost coverage here and impacts on access. All right, the last route before we wrap up. This is a proposal for a new Route 10. As you know, our current Route 10 starts at the Transit Mall, goes up Cleveland to Coddingtown and over Steele and back down Mendocino. It's a very, very highly productive route. One thing that works really well about that route is it's such a quick trip between the Transit Mall and Coddingtown via Cleveland. So one thing we wanted to do in this new route is make that trip in both directions. And so we have created this new route to provide that bidirectional service between the Transit Mall and Coddingtown via Cleveland. We have proposed pulling the service over to Francis and Range instead of going up to Edwards as we do today, because there's been a lot of housing development in this area of Range and more anticipated. And we really see a need to better connect with that new growing neighborhood. So then the Route 10 would continue out of Coddingtown and do the loop that currently serves Kohl's and Kmart on the Route 14 today. So come up Coffee to Hopper. And then it would actually go over the highway up to Round Barn to Vista Community Health and Kaiser buildings up on Round Barn before coming back down through Industrial and Airway back to Coddingtown and then continue downtown. So we've been saying in all our meetings that this route isn't pretty, but it gets a lot of things done from a rider perspective, including providing this two-way service, easy, quick service between downtown and Coddingtown, better connecting Northwest Santa Rosa up to Vista Community Health and the important destinations up on the current Route 14. It gives people a one-seat ride to those destinations, whether they get on at Coddingtown or Transit Mall or Coddingtown. So, you know, it's a little squiggly up there at the top, but we actually think from a rider perspective, it could be a really great improvement in the system, but definitely want your feedback. So I am going to wrap up here, and I know I have a couple of questions here that I want to respond to when we get to questions in just a minute. I do want to show you real quickly one thing to highlight in scenario C, which is the vision or long-range growth scenario. A couple of things that we've shown in that scenario in terms of changes to the route network are extending Route 19 all the way down to Todd Road, and that's shown in this inset here. That's something that we've heard a lot of requests for. And so in this scenario, the Route 19 would come down to Todd Road, cross the highway, and turn around via Dutton and Moreland before coming back up Santa Rosa Avenue. And then on the other side of the highway, we would also break apart Route 12 into two routes. One route would come down Corby all the way down to Moreland and Dutton and turn around and come back. And the other route would come down west, do the loop down Dutton Meadow and Bellevue and return via Hearn and go right back up west the way it came. And so we turn that one-way loop into two bidirectional routes in the long term, recognizing that that area has some transit service need. It has growing development of housing and retail and jobs. And we definitely want ideas for other things that we should incorporate into scenario C. Scenario C will definitely change based on what we adopt as the system for the short-term scenarios. And there's other things that I think we'd like to see happen in scenario C to make it a little bit more visionary and better for riders in the longer term. So that's definitely still a work in progress. So I have time for questions and comments now. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're watching live today on November 18th, you can send your questions to jgibson@srcity.org. You see it on the screen there in front of you, the address. Please put webinar in the subject line. And then finally, after the webinar, if you're watching this any other time, please feel free to send any questions and comments directly to me at rede@srcity.org. And again, I'll just highlight that there's a lot of information as well as copies of these maps I just went through at our Reimagining CityBus website at srcity.org/reimagining. And I have one question here. I'm just gonna take a minute to get back to me and get out of the PowerPoint. So this will just take a second. I think you can see me now, but I don't think I can. So give me a minute. Okay, we're back. So I have one question here. Why drop the Chenate Road stops? It's going to take longer than August 2016 for all the services on Chenate Road to move, which will cause major inconveniences to those that need the mental health or other services and can't get anywhere else if it's dropped before they've moved to easier access locations. Yeah, I think this is a really good point. And that's what I was trying to indicate in the discussion of the current Route 1 loop on Chenate. We understand that, and that's something we've been doing a lot of calling around, finding out, you know, are the services at Chenate going to be there for the long term? What's the plan? And we definitely want to, we definitely recognize that in the short term, there is still a need there and people need to get to those services. So even though you're not seeing a line on the map on Chenate, Parker Hill, and Fountain Grove for a regular fixed route service, we understand that there is still a need there, and we're working on ideas for you know, if we think that a fixed route bus, a 40-foot fixed route bus every half an hour isn't the right solution for that area, what is the right solution? And we're getting a lot of comments from people about needing access to transit in that area. So we'll keep you posted. And as we move through the process, I think we're going to see another idea for how to serve that area might look a little bit different than what we do today. But point really well taken that even in the short term, before the Sutter Hospital site develops, we still have a need there that we need to address. That is the only question I have for right now. I will see if anybody walks in the door to hand me another question. But in the meantime, I just want to thank you for tuning in today. And again, feel free to share this webinar with people. The link that you have right now should work. As soon as we're done today, there should automatically be a recording posted on the same YouTube page. And so that link should work for you to come back and watch this later, or to send on to people that you think might be interested. Just to let you know, we have one more public workshop coming up. If you see these cards on our buses, there's information. That will be Thursday, December 3rd, 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. at the Roseland Village Community Center, which is at 779 Sebastopol Road. But in addition to that workshop, we're going to be doing a lot of other field work at the Transit Mall, Cottingtown, our other major bus stops, to talk to our riders directly, recognizing that a lot of people can't get out to meetings. I'm getting the high sign, no more questions. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks again. Feel free to get me your comments. Please do get me your comments, and the sooner the better, because in the next few weeks, we're really going to start to sift through all these comments we've received and make changes to the maps I presented today before we move on to the next phase. So thanks again, and be in touch. I'm going to stop broadcasting now. Have a good day.